Hello everyone and welcome to tonight's Beginner's Guide to Running. The format for today's talk is that we're going to run through basically some information that as a new runner most people will ask us, and then we'll also have some time for questions as well. So we've got the chat function there, so if anyone would like to ask any questions, then pop them in there. We've had a few other people submit some questions that haven't been able to attend. We will have an access to this recording as well too. So if you'd like to refresh any of this, then you'll have access to this here. So let's get started. So a little bit about myself. So I've been in private practice since 2004. So now coming up to 16 years. I've been working in my current practice in health and high performance since 2018. I've done a bit of postgraduate study. So I've completed my postgraduate diploma in sports chiropractic and also done a master's in sports science. I was awarded a fellow as sports and exercise chiropractor last year. A keen runner myself, love running, completed multiple marathons and Ironman triathlons. I'm the current president of Sports Chiro Australia, and you can find me on socials at Sports Chiro Luke or at Health and High Performance. So a little bit about the facility that I work in. So I'm lucky enough to work in a pretty modern facility at Health and High Performance there. We have access to a small gym space where we can do testing and rehab. We've got access to some high-tech equipment with the Axit system there. So we've got force plates and that sort of thing. So it gives us a lot of data on assessing our runners, and then also have an on-site treadmill as well where we do our running gait analysis, and we'll touch a little bit on running technique and running gait later on in the talk. So firstly, starting at the start, are you fit to run? So 3 things that you need as a runner. Firstly, you need enough mobility to get the leg out behind you in stance. Secondly, you need some stability of your core, the hips and your feet, and to maintain a good posture and optimize the transfer of energy from one leg to the other. And thirdly, you need enough strength and power to drive your body up and forward to propel you and get that forward momentum. So going on to our 3, starting with mobility first, and the 3 mobility tests that I tend to, a great easy test to do at home. Hip flexor mobility, and you can do with the doorway test, and we're going to run through these in greater detail as well. Then we've got our ankle dorsiflexion with the knee to wall test. Then we've got our big toe mobility. And here we are starting with our hip mobility here first. So to test our hip mobility with the doorway test, what we do with this is setting up in kneeling on the leg that we want to test. And what we do is lay our backs up against the doorway, as you can see there. Then we want to have the leg there, we want that to be perpendicular, so at 90 degrees to the floor, so we want that nice and straight there. And then we're going to lay back in the doorway, and then what we do is we arch the back, so we get a bit of a curve in the back there, and then we're going to flatten that arch down there. Now what you should do is you should be able to flatten that arch down fairly well without feeling too much of an intense stretching through the front of the thigh there. So if you're feeling a big stretching through the front, it indicates that there's likely some tightness in that hip flexor there, or in the hip itself. The next one we've got here is the knee to wall test. Now this is a good test that we use for assessing ankle mobility here. And to perform this test, what we do is you get a ruler on the ground, and then you're actually then moving your knee back and forward there. So what we're doing is we're trying to see how far back we can get that foot while still being able to touch the wall with our knee. So once we've found that that's how that number, as we can see through here, so if we can touch there but we can't, we move our foot back and we just can't touch, then we take a reading from the front of the toes there to where we can touch. And normal range we like to see is upwards of 8 or 9 centimeters. In some runners though, we can see that being a little bit stiffer, but we definitely want to see any upwards of 5 or 6, and also symmetry between the 2 sides. So we don't want to see big differences between the left and right. So we like to see them be within about 10% of each other. So making sure that they're nice and even there. Then we've got our big toe. So we've got our hip, we've got our ankle, and now we're going to go on to our big toe mobility. So to perform this test, what you do is sit down, have the knee forward just at the same level of the toes there, and then you're going to just pull that toe back as far as you can get it. And what we're looking for there, and you can check the angle at which you can pull that toe back. And the normal range we want to see there is about 30 to 50 degrees. And this is sort of going through some of the ways that you can improve that. So 30 to 50 degrees for big toe mobility. Then our next stage we're going to move on to there is our strength test. So we've done our mobility, and the three ways that you at home can test your strength to run are firstly calf raise to fatigue, secondly bridge to fatigue, and then thirdly sit to stand till fatigue. Now with the calf raise to fatigue here, the way that we perform this is we get a ruler, and this is good to get someone to help you with this here, but you basically get someone to hold a ruler, and you raise up and on both feet as high as you can go, and then with the ruler you're taking a mark there at the very top. Then you switch to doing it on one leg, and then you go up and down and doing that as many times as you can. And you've got to make sure that your head touches the ruler. And the reason why we use the ruler is to make sure that you're getting nice full raised calf raises, because what we'll find is that people will sometimes cheat and they'll just do sort of little half reps. And also what they will do too sometimes is you want to try and keep a nice steady beat. So we like to say 60 beats per second, or 60 beats per minute. So that's just every second. So going up and down and up and down, because the other thing that people will find that they'll do is they'll often go really quickly and try and power their way through the repetitions. So calf raise to fatigue, and the normals we want to see there is we want to see 25 reps on each leg. And again, we like to see, and there's some graded by ages as well too, but roughly we like to see upwards of 25 reps, and again not be within more than 10% difference from side to side. So we like to see close to symmetry there. The next strength test that we've got here is the single leg bridge endurance. And the way that we do this is you set yourself up onto a bed or a couch or a chair like this here. And then again, you're doing as many as you can on one leg. And once you've done that, then you're doing the same on the other. So you must get this leg straight as you're doing that. And it's a count as a full rep. And then you're doing the other side. And again, we like to see 25 reps for that and no more than 10% difference from side to side. Then our third and final strength test that you can perform at home is a sit to stand test. And the way that you do this is just getting with a chair or something that's not going to slide backwards. And then on a single leg and with your hands on your hips, you're going to stand up and sit down. Now, the important thing with this test is that you're nice and controlled as you're going up and down. So you're not sort of plonking down into the seat, just nice and slow and controlled, keeping those hands on the hips. It's a good test of balance as well too, this one, but you're going to repeat that on one side and then do the same on the other. Now again, with the other two tests, pretty easy to remember here, but we've got 25 reps is the normal, and we want to see them again be within 10% of each other. So what should you do if you don't have the normals there? Firstly, don't despair. If you don't meet those criteria for mobility or strength, it doesn't mean that you can't run. It just means that if you're lacking in certain things, it's probably something that will be advantageous for you to work on and improve, and certainly reduce your risk of getting injured. And in most people, unless there's drastically decreased strength, then we'll sometimes suggest, look, we just want to stick with this for a few weeks, do a bit of strength, and then we can start to move into the running there. And that just reduces the chances of you sustaining an injury, because the last thing you want to do when you're starting to run is get injured and then not be able to do it again. So and if you're also, the other thing too, if you don't quite have all that meet the strength and mobility requirements, you might just might progress a little bit slower in terms of how much more you do week to week. So what do you do if you don't pass those tests? So the good thing is that the mobility tests and also the strength tests can actually be the exercise. So you can repeat that. There's so many different other things of doing that, of building strength and mobility. But in its simplest sense, you can actually just do the test and add some weight to that as well. The next thing we're going to talk about is shoes, and this is actually more a complex area than some realise, really. But there's lots of different types of shoes out there, and if you've ever recently walked into a shoe store, you'll see a wide range of shoes, including things like these called Vibram Five Fingers, which are pretty much just like gloves for your feet. There's not much of a shoe to them at all. Then we've got our barefoot shoes, so no shoes at all. And then we've got our what are called maximalists. So these are sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, these two. We've got these here, which are called minimalists. There's not much to them. And these ones here are called maximalists. You can sort of see this big, thick cushioning in the shoe through there. And these have been quite popular, especially in the amongst the ultra running community there. So the hockers. And then you've got these ones here, and these fancy looking things are what records around the world are being broken in. So these shoes have been taking the long distance running by storm. The Alpha Flight and the next 4% as well too from Nike. And these have got a couple of carbon plates in there that essentially act a little bit like a spring, but they'll set you back certainly a few $100s too. They're not cheap, those ones. So as you can see, 4 very different types of shoe wear there. So some of you may have learned to prescribe your shoes, or you may have been told this in the past that, oh yes, you've got normal arches, you've got high arches, and I've got low arches. But I'm sorry to say, prescribing shoes based on this manner is actually not the way to do it. And there's been a number of changes, and this is coming off the back of research over the last 10 years that have shown that actually prescribing shoes based this way, so giving people that, oh yes, you've got a flat arch, so we're going to give you this shoe, high arch, we've got this shoe, found that it actually doesn't work in terms of reducing injury risk. So we really can't use that. And also the other thing that we know is that just because of how your arch looks, so if you're standing there and you look at your arch, that doesn't mean it doesn't give you any indication of how it behaves once you start running. Because some people can have, a normal looking arch, yet when they start to run, their arch does really flatten down, or what we call pronate. And then we've got people with very flat arches, and they don't change a whole lot at all when they run. So don't rely on people telling you, yes, you're this shaped arch, this is what you need to do. So the two real key things that you want to remember with when choosing a pair of shoes is, number one, wear what's comfortable. And this might seem pretty obvious, but there shouldn't be any wearing in period with shoes. You should be able to put the shoes on and feel comfortable in them immediately. You shouldn't feel like those shoes are making your run harder. Now, most good running stores these days at selling shoes have got treadmills on site, and so I'd highly recommend putting the shoes on, going for a run on the treadmill, and trying lots of different types of shoes. If you're new to running, try different types and see what really fits for you. Because at this stage, some of the best research we've got is that wearing comfortable shoes does potentially help decrease your risk of injury. So wear what's comfortable. The second rule is that we want to avoid sudden changes in running shoes. So if you've been wearing a particular type of running shoe and you're wearing that to the gym, and it's got quite a bit of life left on it, it's not falling apart, well, you know what, just start running with those. What you don't want to do is you don't want to change your shoes too drastically. So going back to some of these images here before, if you've been used to wearing a traditional runner and you think, oh yep, I'm gonna go wear some of these, or I'm gonna take my shoes off full stop, or even going the opposite end, I'm gonna really put a lot of cushioning under there, making a drastic change can be hard for your body to adapt, and it can increase your risk of injury. So don't change too drastically what you're currently wearing. If you decide that you do want to wear a lesser shoe, you like the look of that, or you want to explore that option, well then what you do is, over time, you gradually go to different models to help to get you to where you want to be. But don't change things too often. The tech. So the next thing we're going to talk about is technology, and there might be some tech wizards and techno heads in the audience today. But I know I'm certainly I love my gadgets. But this is what the technology these days, and there's so many different options of what you can do for recording your runs and measuring as well too. So the more common brands that you've probably heard of for these watches, and these are GPS watches here. But you've got things things like your Garmin. You've got your Apple Watch as well too, which have got some ability there, although probably definitely not as good as what your Garmin's are. You've got your Suntos, and then you've got also the apps on the iPhone here, so and Android. And Strava is actually one of the more popular apps out there, and it's actually pretty cool too, because it's got a bit of a social aspect to it as well with Strava. So it's a free app. There's some paid premiums on there, but you can link in with your friends and see what they're doing, and cheer each other on. So it's quite good like that, Strava. So you can actually just use that on your phone. GPS watches can range anywhere in terms of cost, range anywhere from $100 right up to $1,000. And so if you're just new to running, starting with your phone and starting with the Strava app there, or Map My Run's another one as well, is a good option to go with. Also, just on whilst we're on tech as well, is that when you're first beginning to run it, it's actually a very important skill that you want to develop, is just learning to run by feel. And we're going to talk a little bit about running intensity later on, but sometimes not having a watch is actually a good thing. You learn to get in tune with your body rather than sort of constantly looking at your watch thinking, oh yeah, I need to hit this pace, I need to do this. So running by feel there's certainly a lot of merit to that, and some of the best runners in the world do exactly that. And as beginners, you sometimes might sort of get a bit stuck and think, oh no, I need to be hitting this pace. But no, actually just resist the urge to look at it, and just off you go. And some days you'll feel good and you will naturally run a bit faster, and other days it's just not going, and you'll be running slower. Don't get too caught up on the ups and downs of that. That's pretty normal for running. Next, we're going to talk about running technique. And we'll go right off the bat here and say that there is no single best way to run, but there's lots of better ways. So we're all unique in terms of the way that we move, and we've all got our own unique running gait, and that's the way that what we describe as our running pattern. And what you've probably noticed is that when you're walking down the street and you see someone from a distance away, you can often recognise them just by the way that they walk, well before you can actually see their face. And the reason is because we've all got our own gait fingerprint. We've all got our own way of moving. And so the idea with running technique is not to get everyone moving the exact same way, but that there's some fundamentals with running technique that you stick to the fundamentals, and then you can range from that. So running is actually a skill, and it's organised in our brain as such. And just like any other skill, such as swinging a golf club or hitting a tennis ball, there are ways to do it, and there are better ways to do it. And what, like we mentioned before, with swinging a golf club, for instance, you can hit the ball, but then if you learn to do it better with better technique, you can hit it a lot better. And the same applies for running. The other thing with running gait as well is that if a certain activity hurts, well, it certainly pays attention to look at it. And much like it would be if you're in the gym and you're doing squats and you think, oh yeah, it hurts me to squat. Well, you know what? If the same thing applies to running. If it's hurting you to run, well, it certainly pays attention to look at how you're doing that. And so one of the things, a couple of the tips that we look for in running technique, and we can spend hours talking on just running technique in itself, is posture. And that's, you can argue a lot of things start from our posture there. So here we've got three different postures here. On the left-hand side, we can see, and this is me, that's pretending to do all these postures. On the left-hand side, you can see a really slouch forward posture. Now, what that does is puts a lot of work down through the back and the hips there, and it also makes us sort of land out in front of us as we're running along there. You tend to see that also happen when people get fatigued. So as we start to get a bit tired, and especially towards the end of our run, we all tend to sort of slouch a bit more forwards. The middle image here we can see is someone that's actually too upright. So they're very upright there. You can see pretty much perpendicular with the ground there. So they're just standing military tall, and that's not good either, because that again can put some jarring compression on the spine there, and also can create more overstride with the legs landing out in front of us. The image on the right-hand side is actually what we want to see. So we want to see a very slight forward bend there of about 5 to 10, even up to 15 degrees there, and so just a very slight bend. So we're not going too forwards, we're not going too far straight. Most people tend to fall into the too far forwards basket, and so one of the cues that we'll use for them is imagining that there's a string attached to your head, and it's actually just making you tall. It's lifting you up there. Again, we're not making sure that we're not too, perfectly up straight there, just a very slight bend, but just thinking that tall. Another way you can do that as well is actually reaching up as high as you can into the sky, and then just letting those arms drop down, and that sort of helps to refresh that upright posture. Then we've got the next thing, a common fault that we see in with running technique is overstride. And what overstride means is that we're striding out too far in front of ourselves. And if we imagine running is we're basically trying to move forwards, if we're landing all the way out in front of us, it's essentially acting like a big brake, and it's going to be slowing us down, decelerating us. Plus, there's also a lot of braking forces associated with that too. And those braking forces have been shown in a recent study by Napier to be associated with injury. So where we want to do is we want to land a little bit closer to our what we call our centre of mass, or our body here. So you can see on the left-hand side, this is more an ideal position to land in. So you can see the feet are landing a little bit closer to what's called that centre of mass, where we can see on the right-hand side, this person here is landing a long way, a lot further, almost double the distance out in front of themselves there. And you can see that acts like a big brake there. The third part of technique, running technique, that we'll discuss is arm swing. So whereas males tend to be the ones mainly responsible, they tend to be the big ones for overstride, females tend to be the ones with the issues with the arm swing. And one of the common issues with arm swing there are the arms actually crossing the midline. So if we draw a line down the center of your body there, what we want to make sure when the arms are moving back and forward here is that there's no crossing of the body. What that does, that crossing, is it creates a lot of rotation and twisting through the spine, which then transfers all the way down and through the hips, the pelvis, and down into the legs as well. So next we're going to talk about the plan. So the two main areas that we see in runners do when they're starting running is that number one, they do too much too soon. And number two, and they do too much high intensity running. So we can see on through here this image on the left-hand side. This is an example of often an injured runner that comes in to see us, and we talk about what they've done with their training. And as you can see here, lots of ups and downs. And this is looking at week to week differences here. So they'll say sort of, yeah, 1 week I did 3 runs, and the next week I did nothing, and then I did 4, and then I did nothing, and then just this constant up and down. And the body can't adapt to that. It's almost like getting a shock and a surprise every other week. Whereas on the right-hand side, we can see here it's a lot steadier increase. So little by little, gradually increasing week by week. That gives our body, our muscles, our tendons, our bones time to strengthen and adapt to the running load. So a good example, you might have all heard of the 10% rule, but basically the 10% rule is gradually increasing from week to week, adding 10% onto your weekly amount of running. So where the problem, one of the faults with the 10% rule is that it's for beginner runners that are only just sort of starting and going from 0 to 20 kilometers a week. If we increase 10%, it's very small amounts, and it will actually take a very long time to get to a reasonable distance. So for those running small amounts, just starting out at 0 to 10, you can actually increase from anywhere up to 30% from week to week. Now, what we find is that those we mentioned before with those strength tests and the mobility test there, if you've done really well with those, you've got really good strength, really good mobility, well then you can increase up to 30%. But if you're a bit lacking on some of that strength that we primarily strength that we found before, then you might still want to stick to 10 to 20% there. So it's different from person to person, but it's just some general guides that you can abide by. The other thing that we find people do is that they do too fast too soon. So hard running is hard on your body. It takes a lot longer to recover. So we like to recommend an 80-20% rule. So what that means is that 80% of your weekly runs are done at a nice, easy pace. It's what we call a conversation pace. So it's a nice and easy breathing through the nose there. Imagine that you had someone next to you and you could easily talk away to them whilst you're running. That's why we call it a conversation pace. And this is the advantage of running with someone at a similar ability, is you can have that discussion and make sure that you're keeping it nice and easy. So for beginner runners, most of your early runs and even for months are going to be at that lower intensity. The fault that we see a lot of new runners make is that they just get out there and they bust themselves themselves every run. They just go, I've got to get a sweat up, I've got to run really, really hard, and they do too much of that, and then they end up seeing me with an injury. So just remember, take it nice and slow, just that conversation pace. If you hit a hill and you're struggling for air there, walk up the hill, and then once you get to the top, then you can continue running. So don't you're still going to be improving your fitness, and in fact improving it better at that lower intensity. And as we mentioned there, that easy pace and breathing through your nose. So an example plan that we give here, and this is something that I'll give to new runners or people that have been injured for a while and are looking to resume. But basically, weeks 1 to 4 here, you've got 20-minute sessions. And in week 1, you're alternating jogging for 1 minute and then you're walking for 1 minute. So you just keep alternating that amongst that 20 minutes. Then week 2, that distance goes up to 2 minutes, still the walk at 1, and then 3, and then 4, and so forth until week 5. You're doing 20 minutes of continuous running. And you can find, as I said, there repeat weeks as needed. If you're finding that, that jump up's a little bit too much for me, well, you can go back to the week before and just sticking with that. Another really good app, a free app to use, is the Couch to 5K. And as the name suggests, it takes you from the couch to running 5Ks over 8 weeks and doing 3 runs a week. And they're about 30-minute sessions as well. So that's a really cool app that you can use. It gives you a running program for that. So whichever takes your fancy, whether you do the program that we've got there or the Couch to 5K, good way to do it. In terms of with that plan on the screen there, how many runs a week? Well, usually we say 2 or 3, but try and keep that consistent throughout those weeks. Don't sort of say, I'm going to do 2 runs this week and then I'll do 3. Remember what we mentioned before with those ups and downs of the graph. We want to see a nice and gradual increase. So if you think, commit to, I can do 3 weeks, commit to that and make sure you keep that up right throughout the program. Injuries. Well, unfortunately, injuries happen, and they happen quite a lot in running. As much as 50% of runners will get injured. And one of the biggest advices that I can give to runners is that most injuries do have some warning signs. So it's a matter of being in tune with your body. We mentioned earlier on about, with the tech and the watches, just hiding the watch sometimes and just sort of seeing what you feel when you run. Same thing goes with injuries. If you're like, no, this knee still, it's hurting, and it keeps doing the same thing, then that's a sign that there's something there that needs to be checked. And so most runners will put up for things for too long until it gets to the point where they can no longer run. What are abnormal and normal pains? Well, a couple of tips with that. It's normal to have some aching in your muscles after you've done, especially when you're starting up running. But they tend to be a bit more general. So it's sort of, like, my thighs or my calves or, my hamstrings or around my hips are a bit sore. When it starts getting a bit more pinpoint, and it's like, oh no, it's actually the front of my knee there's quite sore, or I've got this spot in my calf there that's not going away. If it's something like that, then it's more likely something that needs some attention, and also something that's just consistently there. So no matter week by week, it's still there, and in fact, it's actually getting worse. Any sort of increasing pain as the week goes on is also a sign that things need to be looked at and assessed. And whilst it's okay to run with pain for most running injuries, probably the only exemption there is stress fractures. It's important to get a diagnosis and a plan. So, and very likely you may not even have to stop running. So with the runners that I see, I will do whatever we can to keep them running through. Only if it's absolutely needed will we say, no, look, let's stop and have a rest. But if it is a period of rest, unless it's a stress fracture, it's only usually a short period of time to calm things down, and then we can build things back up again and get that strong. So there's also a blog that you might not like to read. It's talking about can you exercise with pain. Vast majority of injuries are overload, so they tend to be that overuse injuries. They build up over a period of time, and the vast majority of them are around the knee. And the most common injury that we see in runners is runner's knee, and that's that typical front of kneecap pain. So I mentioned before, if it's something that's just aching around the front of the knee there, hurting to go upstairs or downstairs, or even hurting just to sit, it can be aching there. That's a sign of that runner's knee. And there's multiple things that go into a running injury, and some of these we've spoken about there today. Certainly, your genetics can play a role in injury, your structure, so how you're built, your mechanics, how you move. We spoke about that with our running gait, the training load, so those ups and downs can absolutely affect your risk of injury. Tissue qualities, that's like your strength and your mobility, which we cover today, and psychosocial are things like stress and recovery and that sort of thing, and they also play a role in injury. So when we're seeing an injured runner, these are some of the things that we'll look over and figure out. Oh, yes, for you it's more of this, and then work on identify those factors and work on those that can be. And again, all the different things that contribute to running injury. So I like to use a seesaw analogy here, where you've got stress and then you've got recovery or capacity on one side. So things that you can put on that side of the seesaw there. So if you're putting all your training on there, and then you've got poor sleep, you're not eating very well, putting lots of rocks on this side, and then this side you don't have very good strength, so you don't have much on there, and then that's when an injury can result, when there's that tipping of the scale. So if we can improve your nutrition, improve your sleep, improve your recovery, get your training loads right, and then build on some strength, have some good running gait, and then that's the way that we can even things up and ensure that you stay injury free. So to finish up now with some action points. So firstly, go away and perform those self-tests for strength and mobility and address what needs to be improved. So remember, we've got with our mobility there, we've got our ankle mobility, ideally around 9 centimetres. We've got our hip flexor, our hip test in the doorway, and then we've got our big toe mobility test there as well. And then we've got our three strength tests. So we've got our calf raise to fatigue, we've got our bridge to fatigue, and then we've got our sit to stand as well. So work out which of those you need to work on. Shoes, wear what's comfortable and don't make sudden changes. Whilst technology is really good and there's lots of it available these days, learn to run off feel. So get that nice, easy running pace, conversation pace, talking to someone next to you, breathing through the nose, just making sure we're keeping that intensity nice and low in the beginning. Slowly increase your run, so don't do too much too soon or too fast. Implement the plan that we spoke about before, or there's the Couch to 5K app as well. And listen to your body and seek help if needed. So don't ignore warning signs that are going on. As I mentioned, most running injuries do have these warning signs, and people ignore them, and then problems happen. If you need any further help or any questions, this is where you can find me. You can either find me at send me an email or through the social media, or we've got our Facebook channel there as well too. As I mentioned, I'll send the recording of tonight's session to you, and you can hopefully revise over that. And if there's any questions, then please let us know.